My name is Vera Langston. I'm 28 years old, and I live alone in a small apartment in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm a software engineer working remotely for a tech company based in San Francisco. The job gives me flexibility, space to focus on projects I care about, and honestly, the quiet that fits the kind of life I've chosen for years. But before I moved into my own place, I lived with my dad, Todd, in a two-story house in the suburbs. My mom passed away 5 years ago, and after that happened, I stayed longer than I planned. Not because I couldn't live independently. I could have. I had the income, the stability, the option. But when a family loses someone, sometimes just being present becomes the thin thread holding everything together. And I could see my dad, this man who spent decades as a school teacher, patient with everyone else's kids, quietly unraveling when the house got too quiet. So I stayed. At least that's what I told myself. The fundamental shift started when my older brother, Michael, returned from Berlin with his wife Andrea and their son Levi after living in Europe for 7 years. At the time, I didn't think much of it. They said it would be temporary, just until they got back on their feet after some investment project fell through. They said Europe didn't work out the way they expected. That phrasing always struck me as strange, like they were describing a vacation that got rained out, not a life that collapsed. In the beginning, everyone kept things respectful. So did I. Michael and Andrea were polite. Levi was energetic, loud, wild in the way kids can be when they're overstimulated and undercorrected. And every time Levi barreled down a hallway or grabbed something he shouldn't, Andrea would just smile. This soft, dismissive little expression, like the world was supposed to bend around her child. "Oh, don't be so serious, Vera," she'd say. "He's always been high energy." Back then, I stayed silent. I told myself it wasn't my place. But then Christmas Eve 2023 happened. And on the surface, it didn't seem like a big deal. It was just a soda. Just a laptop. Just a kid being a kid. But from that night on, the quiet boundaries I'd spent years holding in place began to crack. And I realized something more clearly than ever before. There are some lines, once crossed, where nothing ever really goes back to how it was. That night, for the first time in nearly a decade, our whole family sat together around the dinner table, gathered for Christmas in my dad's two-story house tucked away in a quiet Cincinnati suburb. Everything looked right. The tree was perfectly decorated. The warm yellow glow of the floor lamp filled the corner of the room, just like always. The faint scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. But inside the room, something felt off. Like a smile held too long. Like laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. Dinner was a full spread. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, warm dinner rolls, and a few extra dishes Andrea had helped prepare. At first, conversation stayed polite. Everyone carefully skirted around anything that might stir tension. Even my dad seemed more open than usual. He sat at the head of the table, mostly listening, occasionally topping off someone's glass, like he was trying to keep the night smooth through sheer effort. And then, right in the middle of dinner, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I checked the screen. A critical system error notification. The kind that doesn't wait. The kind that can sync a project, trigger alarms, and drag you into a spiral of emergency calls. And in our tech team, I was the only one with the access level to resolve it. I tried to ignore it for 3 seconds. Then 5. Then my chest tightened because I knew if I didn't act, people would be awake all night cleaning up something I could fix in minutes. So I excused myself. I went upstairs to my workspace, a small, organized room at the end of the second-floor hallway. I'd set it up specifically so I could jump into work anytime. I logged in, started running diagnostics, but a few minutes in, I realized I'd left my authentication device in the car. My stomach dropped. I headed back downstairs, walked through the hallway, into the garage, grabbed the device, and immediately moved back toward the second floor. I was halfway down the hall when I froze. My office door was wide open. And Levi, Michael's son, was standing in front of my desk, right in the center of the room. What made me stop wasn't just that he was in there, it was what he was holding. An open can of soda, still fizzing at the top. My brain tried to catch up to the image, like maybe if I processed it fast enough, I could change the outcome. "Levi," I started. But before I could take another step, he tilted the can and poured the entire thing over the keyboard of my running laptop. A full, shimmering stream. Like he was watering a plant. "No, no!" I rushed forward, grabbed his wrist, and yanked his arm away from the desk. But it was too late. The screen flickered once, then went black. Everything I was working on disappeared right in front of me. My hands hovered over the dead keyboard like I could bring it back through force of will. And then I turned to him. My voice came out shaking, full of disbelief and anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" For half a second, I thought he realized he'd gone too far. I thought I might see guilt, fear, at least a flinch. But then his face shifted into something that stopped me cold. Because Levi didn't look sorry. He looked defiant. He stared straight at me, squinted his eyes, and stuck his tongue out like it was a joke. No nervous laughter. No hesitation. And then, like he was daring me to do something, he calmly raised his middle finger at me. 9 years old. And he held it there, steady. He didn't say a word. Didn't blink. Then he turned around and walked out of my office with the same calm stride, like none of it mattered. I stood there frozen. The anger didn't explode, it sank. It dropped into my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. And it wasn't because of the laptop. It was because of the look in his eyes. The look of a child who had just stripped me of every bit of respect I had in my own home. This didn't feel like a childish accident. It felt deliberate, like a line had been crossed, clearly, proudly, on purpose. And I knew right then I wasn't letting it slide. I took one shaky breath, then another. Then I walked straight downstairs into the dining room. My face felt oddly calm, like something inside me had gone cold and steady. Without waiting for anyone to ask, I called out, "Levi!" My voice wasn't loud, but it was firm enough that every fork paused mid-motion. Levi's head snapped up. Then he immediately moved toward Andrea, hiding behind her like a shield. "Of course." I stepped closer and kept my tone measured. "You need to apologize for what you just did." Levi didn't even hesitate. Still half hidden behind his mom, he said, clear as day, "I didn't do anything wrong." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were rude, but because of how confidently he said them, like he truly believed consequences were for other people. I turned to Michael and Andrea and told them exactly what happened. I didn't exaggerate, didn't scream, didn't add drama. I just laid out the facts from beginning to end. When I finished, Andrea frowned like I'd insulted her. Then she said, firm and unwavering, "You're saying Levi did that?" "No, I don't believe it." Michael stayed silent. My brother, my older brother, just sat there with his eyes fixed on me like he was trying to figure out what hidden motive I might have. He didn't ask a single question, didn't turn to Levi, didn't try to understand. Just silence. And that's when it hit me. They weren't reacting to the story. They were reacting to the fact that I dared to say it out loud at the dinner table. They didn't want the truth. They felt insulted that the truth had been spoken. The room grew heavier. Everyone looked down. No one met my eyes. And I stood there in the same house I'd known for years, suddenly feeling like I had stepped into a place I was never really invited into. I didn't even feel disappointed anymore. I felt warned, because one thought came through loud and clear. If this silence continues, if this avoidance keeps repeating, then what happened today is just the beginning. I knew I needed proof, something that would cut through their denial. So without saying another word, I pulled out my phone and opened the video clip from the camera I'd set up in my office. The footage was crystal clear. Levi walked in with the soda, tilted it, poured it straight over my laptop, then turned and flipped me off. I handed the phone to Andrea. I said nothing. She stared at the screen. For a second, discomfort flickered across her face. But then her voice came out smooth and light, like she was commenting on a harmless commercial. "He probably picked that up somewhere," she said. "It was just an accident." My lungs forgot how to work. I turned to Michael, hoping for something. Anything. But he leaned back, crossed his arms, and said slowly, "Don't make a big deal out of this. You're the adult. Don't stoop to a kid's level." In that moment, something inside me didn't burn hotter. It drained. What rose instead was a hollow, numbing emptiness. They had seen it. They had the proof. And they still chose to protect the lie, because admitting the truth would mean admitting they'd failed to teach their son basic decency. I looked over at Levi. He stood beside Andrea with the faintest half smirk. No fear, no regret. And that's when I understood something that made my skin go cold. Levi had never been taught to take responsibility, because his parents had never truly tried to teach him. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I stood up so sharply my chair scraped the floor. My voice came out firm, loud enough for the entire table. "That's what you call an accident? You saw the video. Are you all seriously asking me to pretend I didn't just watch him do it?" The room snapped into silence. Andrea turned her face away, lips pressed tight, hand clamped on Levi's shoulder like she was trying to pull him closer. Michael lifted his eyes to mine, and his expression wasn't confused anymore. It was confrontation. At the far end of the table, my dad still hadn't said a word. He held his half-finished glass of wine, gaze fixed on me, steady, unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was angry, concerned, or waiting for the right moment to step in. Then Michael shoved his chair back and stood up. He slammed his hand on the table. The sound rattled the plates. He shouted, fury flaring in his eyes. "What the hell did you just say, Vera? Don't you lie to me. I'm your brother." The shout stopped me cold. The man in front of me didn't feel like the brother who used to talk things through. He felt like someone protecting something rotten out of pure instinct. And for one painful second, I flashed back to childhood. Michael defending me at a family gathering when people teased me for being weird because I spent all day on computers. He'd once told me, "If you know you're right, you've got the right to speak up." And now, just because his son had done something wrong, he was the first one trying to silence me. Before I could respond, my father's voice rang out. Not loud, but clear, each word impossible to ignore. "Everyone, sit down now." The room went still in a new way. Andrea clutched Levi. Michael didn't move at first. His hands stayed pressed to the table, eyes locked on me. Then my father stood in the open space, gaze sweeping across all of us, before settling on Levi. His voice was deep, slow, firm. "Levi, what you did was wrong. Apologize to your Aunt Vera." Levi said nothing. He turned his head away, fingers clutching the edge of his shirt. Andrea leaned down and whispered into his ear, so quiet only the two of them were supposed to hear it. But I caught the words. "It's okay, sweetheart, we're right here." My father didn't react outwardly, but his hands curled into fists. And in that moment, I felt something crack beneath the surface of this house. Something old, something held together by habit and silence. No yelling, no shattered plates. Just a shift, a point of no return. I looked at Michael and Andrea and forced my voice calm again. "I backed up the data to the server in time," I said. "But that laptop is my work machine." Then I paused, because the next part mattered more. And being disrespected in my own home isn't something I can pretend didn't happen. I met their eyes. "I expect you to replace the laptop." Andrea's lips pressed into a thin line. Her voice turned cold. "We don't have the money," she said, "and we don't think we did anything wrong." Michael stared at the edge of the table. No apology. No solution. Just quiet refusal. My dad exhaled like the air weighed 100 pounds. "Enough," he said finally, tired but firm. "Go to your rooms. I'll talk to you in the morning." One by one, people stood and left in silence. Footsteps echoed across the wooden floor like punctuation marks on a sentence no one wanted to finish. I stayed seated, staring at untouched plates, my chest tight. The Christmas tree still glowed in the corner like nothing had happened, but I felt it in my bones. Tomorrow morning would not be ordinary. Later, after the house went still, I sat in my room wiping my laptop with a cloth, dabbing at keys, crevices, like I could undo what was done. But I already knew. The circuitry was fried. The screen stayed black. It was just a cold block of metal now. I logged into my company's system on my phone and left an urgent message, requested support, reassigned what I could. The work disruption hurt, but not as much as the place it happened. The one place I used to believe was safe. As I was about to set my phone down, my dad walked past my door. He didn't come in. He didn't look at me. He only said one thing, soft enough that only I could hear it. "Don't fix it yet." I looked up into the dark hallway. He paused just long enough for the words to sink in. Then he added, quieter, like a thought he didn't want anyone else to steal. "I need it that way." And when his footsteps faded, I sat there staring at my dead laptop, realizing my father wasn't planning a conversation. He was planning a lesson. And whatever he intended to do in the morning was going to change everything. I barely slept that night. Not because of work. My project was already handed off. My inbox eerily quiet. But because my mind kept replaying Levi's face. That look. The calm defiance. The way he flipped me off like he knew the adults around him would absorb the consequences on his behalf. Around 6:30 a.m., the house was already awake. Not bustling, not noisy. Just alert. Like every room was holding its breath. I stepped out of my bedroom and immediately felt it. The tension hadn't dissipated overnight. If anything, it had hardened, settling into the walls, the floors, the stair rails we'd all touched thousands of times. No one spoke. Michael passed me in the hallway without eye contact. Andrea stood in the kitchen scrolling on her phone, jaw tight, movements sharp and clipped like she was performing calm instead of feeling it. Levi was sprawled on the living room couch, completely absorbed in a game on his iPhone 14 Pro Max, one leg hanging over the armrest, volume up, face relaxed, like nothing had happened. That image alone made my stomach twist. Because guilt doesn't look like that, denial does. A few minutes later, my dad stepped into the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sigh. He just said evenly, "Everyone, living room, now." No one argued. No one questioned him. We all moved like we already knew this conversation had been scheduled the moment he told me not to fix the laptop. We sat, Michael and Andrea on the couch, Levi between them, still clutching the phone. I took the armchair across from them. My dad remained standing. He folded his hands in front of him, not in prayer, not in comfort, but the way he used to before addressing a classroom full of students who thought they could out-talk him. He looked at Michael and Andrea first. Then he asked calmly, "After thinking about it last night, do either of you believe your son did anything wrong?" Silence. Not the awkward kind. The intentional kind. Michael stared at the floor. Andrea pressed her lips together, eyes fixed somewhere past my dad's shoulder. Levi didn't even look up. His thumbs kept moving. I didn't speak. I already knew the answer. After several long seconds, my dad nodded once, like he was acknowledging something he'd already suspected. Then he turned and walked directly toward Levi. Everything slowed. Before anyone could react, my dad reached down, snatched the phone from Levi's hands, and walked straight to the coffee table. Sitting there was a ceramic mug, still steaming, filled with hot tea Andrea had poured minutes earlier. Without hesitation, my dad dropped the phone into the mug. The device sank instantly. There was a sharp, crackling pop as steam rose from the surface. Andrea gasped, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" She jumped to her feet, panic breaking through her controlled tone. That phone cost over $2,000. My dad didn't turn around. He looked at the mug. Then he said evenly, "And Vera's laptop became trash." Andrea froze. Levi stared at the mug, eyes wide now, not confused, not scared, just stunned that something he valued had consequences. I felt my pulse pounding, but I stayed still. Because I understood something in that moment. This wasn't about punishment. It was about mirroring. Andrea rushed forward and pulled the phone out of the tea, liquid dripping between her fingers. She grabbed napkins, wiping frantically, like she could reverse time if she moved fast enough. The screen stayed black. She looked up at my dad, voice shaking. "That was my property." My dad finally turned to face her. "And last night," he said calmly, "you told Vera her property didn't matter." Andrea opened her mouth, then closed it. Michael stood halfway up from the couch, hands hovering uselessly at his sides. "Dad, this is too far." Before he could finish, my dad raised one hand. "Sit." Michael sat. The room was quiet again, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of consequences that could no longer be ignored. And then, before anyone could redirect the moment, I stood up. Slowly, deliberately, I looked straight at Michael and Andrea, and without changing my expression, I raised my middle finger, just like Levi had done to me. No yelling, no shaking, just cold, direct, unmistakable. Andrea let out a sharp scream. "What the hell is wrong with you, Vera?" Michael went still, his face drained of color, eyes flicking between me and his son like something was finally connecting. And he didn't like what it was showing him. Levi shrank back into the couch. For the first time since this all began, he didn't smirk. He didn't talk back. He just stared. My dad stepped into the center of the room again. He looked at Michael and Andrea and asked one simple question. "How does that feel?" No one answered. Andrea's jaw trembled. She turned away, clutching the ruined phone to her chest like it was proof she'd been wronged. Michael stared at the floor, breathing shallowly. I lowered my hand. I didn't feel satisfied. I felt something shifting, something uncomfortable but necessary. After a few seconds, Andrea lifted her head, anger breaking through again like a last defense. "I'll call the police," she snapped. My dad met her gaze without blinking. "Go ahead," he said. "And while you're at it, tell them what your child did last night. Show them the video." Andrea didn't move. She didn't speak. Michael sank back into the couch, one hand covering his face. The illusion was cracking. My dad exhaled slowly. Then he spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the weight of someone who had waited too long to say these words. "I never expected my children to be rich," he said, "or impressive, or admired." He looked at Michael. "All I ever wanted was for you to know right from wrong." His voice tightened just slightly. "I raised you to believe that family is a place you can return to, whether you succeed or fail. But if you choose to defend what you know is wrong, then you're teaching your child that morality is optional." Michael's shoulders shook. He didn't cry, but something inside him fractured. He lifted his head and finally looked at me. His voice was low. "Vera, I'm sorry, I was wrong." I didn't respond right away. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because apologies don't erase moments. They open doors. They don't walk through them for you. Andrea turned to Levi and whispered urgently, "Say you're sorry." Levi looked at me. His eyes were flat. Then he said clearly, deliberately, "I didn't do anything wrong. I hate her." And then, like a switch flipped, he collapsed onto the floor, screaming, kicking, thrashing like the world had betrayed him. No one moved. No one rushed to comfort him. We all just watched. And in that awful stillness, I knew something irrevocable had happened. They finally saw it. This wasn't a mischievous kid. This was the result of every excuse they had ever made. Michael shot up and grabbed Levi's arm. "Stop it," he said firmly. "This is not how you act when you're wrong." Levi screamed louder. Andrea started forward. Michael snapped, "Don't!" She froze. I stepped back beside my dad, my heart pounding. We both understood. Stepping away wasn't avoidance. It was space. Space for them to finally face the child they had raised. I don't know what was said behind that closed door, but I heard raised voices. I heard Andrea crying. And for the first time, Michael didn't defend the noise away. That night, dinner passed in silence. Levi stayed in his room. No one forced him out. And as the food grew cold on the table, Michael finally spoke, his voice steady, exhausted, honest. "I think it's time we take him somewhere," he said. "Somewhere that can teach him consequences from the beginning." My dad didn't hesitate. "He needs to be taught how to start over," he said. "Camp Consequence." Then he looked at me. "Vera, contact them." Michael nodded. Andrea said nothing. And in that moment, I realized something chilling and clear. The real fallout hadn't started yet. It was only just taking shape. No one slept much that night. The house didn't feel angry anymore. It felt resigned, like every wall had accepted that something irreversible was happening. Even the silence had changed. It wasn't avoidance now. It was acknowledgement. Dinner passed without Levi. No one called him down. No one knocked on his door. The absence was intentional, and for the first time, it didn't feel cruel. It felt necessary. Michael stared at his plate long after he'd stopped eating. Finally, he looked up at my dad. "I can't let this go on," he said quietly. "I've already failed at my career. I can't fail at raising my son." Andrea sat beside him, hands folded tightly under the table. Her face was pale, unreadable, not defiant anymore, just hollow. My dad nodded once. "He needs to be taught from the beginning," he said, "and he won't learn that here." Then he turned to me. "Vera, reach out to Camp Consequence." The name sounded harsh, even to me, but I didn't argue. I knew what my father meant. Some children don't respond to softness, not because they're bad, but because they've never been allowed to feel the weight of their actions. I emailed the camp that night. By morning, they'd responded. They had an opening. They were ready to take Levi by the weekend. The speed of it made my chest tighten. When consequences move fast, you don't get the luxury of denial. Andrea found out over breakfast. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just sat there staring into her coffee like she was afraid that if she looked up, she'd break. That afternoon, my boyfriend Ethan called. He'd heard my voice the night before, tight, distant, and knew something was wrong. When I explained everything, he went quiet for a long moment. "That sounds intense," he said carefully. "Are you sure this is the right move?" The question landed heavier than he intended. I wasn't angry at him, but I felt it, that familiar pressure to soften the truth so other people could stay comfortable. "I'm sure this is the move that happens when no one wants to be the bad guy," I said. Ethan didn't argue, but I could tell he was unsettled. And part of me wondered whether he was seeing a side of me that didn't fit neatly into his idea of peace. Saturday morning came too quickly. The sky was low and gray, the air sharp with winter chill. Michael loaded the car in silence. Levi stood on the porch with Andrea. She didn't crouch down. She didn't hug him the way she usually did. She just rested one hand over her chest like she was trying to keep something from caving in. Levi didn't cry at first. He climbed into the back seat quietly, staring out the window. The drive felt endless. No music, no conversation, just the hum of the tires against the road. It wasn't until the guard post of Camp Consequence came into view that Levi broke. He started screaming for his mom, twisting in his seat, kicking the door. Then he turned on me. "You did this," he shouted. "I hate you." I didn't respond. Michael didn't either. His hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. When we opened the door, my dad was already there. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just nodded once at Michael, and then at me. That nod wasn't approval. It was resolve. Levi fought as they led him toward the gate. The sound of it, his crying, his voice cracking, followed us even after the metal door closed behind him. I stood there staring at the fence. I didn't feel relief. I felt a hollow opening in my chest, like something had been removed without anesthesia. On the drive back, no one spoke. Andrea sat rigid in the passenger seat, eyes red but dry. When we pulled into the driveway, she didn't come inside. She stayed on the porch long after the car doors closed. That week, the house changed. Not dramatically. Quietly, Michael and Andrea stopped circling each other in defense and started speaking in clipped, honest fragments. I overheard things I wasn't meant to hear. About Berlin. About debt. About how much they'd hidden, not just from us, but from each other. And one night, I heard Andrea say something that stopped me cold. "If we'd dealt with it back then," she whispered, "maybe he wouldn't be like this now." That was the first time she'd admitted it. A crack in the armor. Ethan came over midweek. He tried to be supportive, brought food, sat beside me on the couch. But I could feel the distance growing. Not emotional, philosophical. "I just don't know if I could do that," he said softly. "Sending a kid away like that." I looked at him, and I realized he wasn't judging me. He was afraid. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of lines that don't bend. "I didn't send him away," I said. "I stopped pretending his actions didn't matter." Ethan nodded. But I could tell he was still processing what that meant for us. The days passed. Then weeks. The house grew calmer, not healed, but quieter in a way that allowed reflection. And then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. It wasn't addressed to Michael. It wasn't addressed to Andrea. It was addressed to me, in Levi's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, and as I read the first line, I knew whatever came next would change the shape of our family forever. I stared at the envelope longer than I needed to. My name, Vera Langston, was written in uneven block letters, the kind a child uses when they want to be understood clearly. The corners were bent, like it had been folded and unfolded more than once before being sealed. For a moment I considered not opening it, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of what it might reopen inside me. I sat at the dining table alone and slid my finger under the flap. The paper inside was wrinkled, creased, smudged in places where the pen had pressed too hard. It read, "Aunt Vera, I am sorry for the computer and for being rude. I didn't know why you were so mad, but now I do. They make us clean everything ourselves here, even when it's not our mess. I don't like it, but I think that's the point. I hope you forgive me. Levi." There were a few German words mixed in, misspelled, clearly copied from memory. I read it 3 times. Not because I needed clarity, but because something unfamiliar was happening inside my chest. It wasn't relief. It wasn't triumph. It was recognition. For the first time, Levi wasn't denying what he did. He wasn't hiding behind his parents. He wasn't pretending it didn't matter. He was uncomfortable. And discomfort, real discomfort, was new for him. That night, I didn't say anything about the letter. I just folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Some things needed time to breathe. During the weeks Levi was gone, the house settled into a strange rhythm. Michael and Andrea didn't fight loudly anymore. They didn't defend reflexively. They talked, quietly, late at night, in voices stripped of performance. More than once, I passed the hallway and heard fragments spill out. We should have handled it sooner. We were embarrassed. Berlin wasn't just bad luck, we lied. That was the first time I realized how much of their parenting had been shaped by shame instead of guidance. They hadn't protected Levi because they believed he was right. They'd protected him because admitting he was wrong meant admitting they were wrong first. One afternoon, my dad came home carrying 2 boxes. He set them on the table without ceremony. One was a brand new phone, still sealed. The other was a laptop, same model as mine, better specs. Each box had a small sticky note on top. Andrea Vera. Andrea stared at the boxes like they might explode. "I can't accept this," she said quietly. "Not after everything." I shook my head. "Neither can I." My dad didn't argue. He just looked at both of us and said, "This isn't about money. It's about closing a lesson properly." Then, after a pause, he added, "As long as you've learned something, I don't need repayment." No anger, no lecture, just finality. Something broke through the tension then. Not laughter, exactly. More like exhalation. Andrea sat down heavily and covered her face. Michael rubbed his hands together and stared at the floor. And then, unexpectedly, we all laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the truth, simple and unadorned, had finally been spoken. Around that time, Ethan and I had a conversation that had been hovering for days. He came over one evening, quiet, thoughtful. "I keep thinking about what happened," he said, "about how easily people asked you to stay quiet for peace." I waited. "I don't want to be that person," he continued, "the one who benefits from your silence." I didn't respond right away. Then I said, "I don't need someone who agrees with me all the time. I need someone who doesn't ask me to disappear." He nodded. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was honest. A month later, Levi came home. He was thinner, quieter. He didn't meet my eyes at first. Andrea hovered, but stopped herself when Michael gave her a look. Levi stood in the living room, hands clenched, shoulders tight. "I'm sorry," he said again, this time out loud, "for everything." I didn't hug him. I didn't scold him. I just said, "Thank you for saying that." That was enough. Over time, things didn't snap back into place. They reassembled, slower, more carefully. Michael and Andrea restarted their lives with a small European deli downtown. Nothing flashy, just honest work and visible effort. Levi changed, not magically, not overnight, but noticeably. He stopped pushing limits just to see who would bend. And 3 months later, I moved into my own place. Every weekend, Levi comes over. We play video games, eat fried chicken, sometimes sit in silence. He's still stubborn, but now he knows when to stop. And that makes all the difference. Exactly 1 year after that Christmas Eve, my family sat together again. The tree glowed, the food was warm, and this time, the peace wasn't borrowed. It was earned. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this. Families don't break from explosions. They break from the quiet decision to ignore what's wrong, over and over again. Speaking up didn't save my family, but staying silent would have destroyed it. Exactly 1 year after that Christmas Eve, I found myself standing in my dad's living room again. Same house, same walls, same quiet Cincinnati street outside dusted with winter frost. But everything else was different. The tree was lit, not overly decorated, not perfect, just warm. The kind of glow that doesn't try to impress anyone. The food on the table wasn't elaborate either. Simple dishes, familiar ones. No one trying to prove anything. And for the first time in a long time, no one was bracing themselves. Michael arrived early. He carried a tray from the deli, sliced meats, fresh bread, something he'd clearly prepared himself. He looked lighter, still serious, still worn around the edges, but no longer defensive. Andrea followed behind him. She paused at the doorway like she used to, but this time she didn't scan the room for threats. She smiled at my dad, a real one. Brief, but real. And then Levi stepped inside. He didn't run ahead, didn't grab anything, didn't test the room. He looked at me first. Just a glance, quiet, checking in. I nodded. That was enough. Dinner unfolded without tension. Conversation drifted naturally about the deli, about a neighbor my dad helped fix a fence for, about how the city had changed in small ways. Levi spoke when spoken to, listened when he wasn't. At one point, he accidentally knocked over a glass of water. The room stilled. He froze. Then, before anyone could react, he grabbed napkins and said, "I'll clean it. No drama, no tears. Just responsibility." Andrea watched him like she was seeing her son for the first time. Later that evening, after the plates were cleared and the tree lights were the only ones left on, Levi disappeared down the hallway. When he came back, he was holding something in both hands. He stopped in front of me. "I made this," he said quietly. It was a card, folded unevenly, crayon letters on the front. Inside, written carefully, slowly, were words that looked like they'd been rewritten more than once. "Aunt Vera, thank you for not letting me be bad forever. I didn't understand before. I do now." My throat tightened. I didn't cry. I didn't hug him. I just said, "I'm proud of you." And I meant it. Later that night, Ethan came by to pick me up. He greeted my family easily now. Not cautiously, not politely, but like someone who knew where he stood. As we walked to the car, he squeezed my hand. "You know," he said, "watching all of this, I finally understand something." I raised an eyebrow. "Loving someone doesn't mean keeping everything calm," he continued. "Sometimes it means letting things get uncomfortable so they can get better." I smiled, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. That Christmas didn't give me peace wrapped in shiny paper. It gave me clarity. It taught me that boundaries aren't cruelty, that silence isn't kindness, and that speaking up, even when your voice shakes, can change the direction of an entire family. So I'll leave you with this. Was I wrong for choosing to speak up that night instead of keeping the peace? Or was that the first time I finally respected myself enough to stop pretending everything was fine? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. And if this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been the one expected to stay quiet for the sake of harmony, know this. Your voice matters more than the comfort of people who refuse to listen. Thank you for staying with me through every step of this journey.